Good to go. So as soon as you're done, just hit the stop broadcast button, and yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Okay. Sent. I'm just going to zip through the slides for the people at home. We've already started. Recording's a little late. You guys have the pause button, so you can read through this. We're from Oakland. Discovery. Very disco. Go. Okay, so discovery somewhere in the middle. Lead qualification is important for us as an agency, and that kind of feeds into how we respond to projects or talk with clients, even in this early phase of estimation or casual conversation, lack of formality around contracts and money. All of these things are kind of about the initial engagement, and they connect with discovery. But discovery proper is a little bit of something else, and we'll break that down a little bit. I'll show some examples of what we do and what I think about it. After discovery never really ends. We always have something to learn. But generally, we've gone through a process. We feel much more educated about our knowledge of the client and their understanding of our capabilities. We've started to make some plans. Things have changed. People come to you, they want something, maybe now they want something else, maybe we come up with a new idea, we re-estimate, we rethink things, we lay it out, we move into actually implementing things, which I'll break apart a little bit more. It's not just like straight up think do. Some of the, hello? Yes, I am. I'm live. You're live. So, previously people would make you come up with a plan, like in manufacturing, you draw some plans up, you put it on the assembly line, you make it, then you sell it. It's like a 3-part thing. It's a little bit more fuzzy here. We'll get into that a little bit. Support is another part of the engagement that we are involved in, and that's the ongoing maintenance and evolution of a web development project. Or in some cases, we do other technologies and things that are not particularly web related. First thing that's really important, when starting discovery is to devise a system and achieve consensus around it. And that's very important because, well, first, you're not going to get anywhere unless people can start to agree on things. Figuring out how you're going to agree upon things, it's kind of meta, but it's necessary. And there are different cultures within various organizations, levels of technical proficiency. There may be limitations, there may be NDAs and different things that preclude you from using particular technologies. But there's a general sort of flow that these things can take. Well, I mean, how does it work? It's maybe a little bit brittle. A lot of people are into Agile now. When most people nowadays, when they're talking about discovery and they're talking about development, a lot of development, especially in Drupal, uses Scrum methodologies, which is Agile. And they talk about discovery as being a kind of more waterfall process, and this sort of hybrid thing is something that maybe I jokingly call Wagile, but I think that there's ways, and I'm going to talk about them, of doing discovery in an agile way. So right now, I think this is how a lot of people think about discovery. It's like this little chunk at the beginning. And a lot of Drupal shops are very technically oriented. They're like wanting to get into the code because it's agile, and that's where you learn things. Discovery is maybe this thing where you make this plan, and if you plan too much, you're gonna over architect, and then once you get into the code, it's gonna be all for naught. So we have to get into implementation really quickly, and I think that is too far. It's too far down one road. What tends to happen in these scenarios is you lead towards an MVP. You're like, implement. Let's build this thing, and then we'll move into support. And honestly, this is a lot of what we've been doing, and we've noticed that there are some pitfalls to this scenario. What we would really, what I'm thinking is, and what I'm trying to move towards is something a little bit more like this, where we have more, not requirements gathering, but more conversation, more in depth, trying things out, building things, prototyping more, and extending this notion of kind of discovery and overlapping some of the implementation a little bit, kind of like fading in and out. What that allows us to do, hopefully, and is get to this place where we move the MVP up, because we're getting much closer to what we want to achieve. It's more definable, and then we can get into this magical space here, which is the gold, right? This is all the stuff that you never have time to do in the project, and it just gets pushed into the backlog. But that's where we want to be. That's where we deliver the real value to the client. And I think that the only way we can do that is if we work harder initially and smarter, and have like more genuine conversations, use some real tools, and adapt to figure these difficult problems out. In order to have this implementation phase shrunk, it's certainly necessary for us to develop more automation tools, better start states, code reuse, and these are the kinds of things that also inform, and the same questions that inform discovery. We're not building a system from scratch, we're leveraging Drupal, but we also have a roster of clients with a similar type of profile that have certain common needs. So our goal is to make websites affordable and make the process interesting and tailored, but we can't spend all of that time rebuilding the same things. It's just not valuable. It's not right. We want to lower that barrier. So how do we do that? First, we need to choose some right tools for the job. I have like four basic criteria for the tool selection I think are fairly important. One, you need some kind of collaborative documentation, Google Docs, or some place that everyone can write together, build things together. Depending on the project, that may take different shape and size. Some canonical store for that information, a wiki, Confluence, Redmine, other systems, they have these types of things. You need a system to keep your priorities up to date. You need a project management tool. You need Jira, you need Trello, you need something of that nature. It's something that gives you a bird's eye view of where things are at, what's most important, and gives you the ability to reassess those priorities. Lastly, you need some instant feedback. You need to be able to get on the horn. Telephone's great, instant messenger, these types of things. Close that feedback loop. And just be in touch. Those are important things. Email is death. Email is where you get like random things that are just like off the cuff. You don't even know like if the person was like out at the bar and they had this great idea and they shoot you this email and you're just like, great, okay. And that's we want to push people towards the systems that are engineered for collaboration, and that's definitely not email. So this is something that we do. We produce an artifact document often because at Discovery we're creating a whole bunch of different tangible assets, and we want to educate the client where we're going, how the stuff is going to play out. These things change a little bit. Some of these artifacts are more useful than others. But this is like one that we did earlier. We talk about, how is this project going to play out? So in this case, we're going to do some discovery. We're going to do an audit of the site. We're going to look at some analytics. We're going to do some stakeholder interviews. There's a technical discovery piece. There's some user experience discovery. We're going to produce some design assets. Those things are going to feed in ultimately to the prototype. The prototype is going to continue to evolve, get feedback through user testing. And the prototype is going to refer back consistently to the second tier of information, which is the spec, our accessibility targets, our sitemap, our style tiles, and I'm going to pull a bunch of these things apart and show you some examples of how that can work. Starting with analytics, I'm not really going to show much detail in analytics, but it's a really good idea if sites already have web traffic to look at what that really means. Often, as we get a different perspective on audience, we get a different perspective on trends and targets, and playing that back to the organization can be very helpful. It can help to define some later parts, some later phases. So another thing that we like to do sometimes can be a little tricky to organize, but user testing. Talking to people, actual users, especially if the site has a very narrow user focus. There are a lot of assumptions that we make, and time again, watching people perform operations, do the things they need to do, always surprises you. You're like, what are you doing, right? How did you think to do that? And because we're educated a certain way, and we abstract that education, we perform a process of subtraction, and then add back on top knowledge that we assume people have. But they have a whole other, place that they're drawing from to make these decisions, to improvise, and they're not us. So that's really important. Those things, the analytics, the real information, the real patterns, and studying like how individuals use the site doesn't have to be big. You do a little session, sit down for half an hour, watch people do things, ask them to perform some operations, download this thing, try to find some help text. We develop persona. Does everyone know what a persona is? Yes? You guys know? No? Okay. So a persona is an abstract, it's a fictional person that has characteristics. They're like a stereotype. And you give them a little backstory, or like Joe, 35, enjoys skiing, has like 4 iPads, and never uses an actual computer. And using these personae, I'll get into this a little bit more later too, but we measure the functionality against the needs of these characters. You can't design for everyone. If you design for a good 80%, you're going to find it much easier to cover that rest of the 20%. But it's so easy to fall into these edge cases of functional requirements. If we really need this thing, it's like, no, does Joe need it? He's on his iPad. Does it matter to him? No? Okay, well, let's put it in there. Let's see, but let's focus on what the real needs of the users are. Super, super important. So this is a tool tying back to these users, these personas, and it's called a customer journey. It's something that we occasionally employ, particularly in organizations that have complicated processes. Sometimes a website, is not the only point of interaction that a user has, or a member, or a constituent with the organization. How does that play out? We're looking at this narrow thing we're building, which is a website, but this was not something we produced. Everything else we produced, but I grabbed this one off the internet here. There's a little link there. So, fabulous firm, you guys did. Anyways, it's like, where is the right conversation space for this? The website, okay, there's newsletters, there's telephone calls, there's support, because ultimately, websites can do everything, but they can't do some of the most important things in your organization. They can't go out there and shake hands. They can't help you relate to the customer in every possible way. And we have to leverage our strengths. We work with a lot of nonprofit organizations. We work with a lot of higher education clients. And we need to find the most appropriate and the best wins for them. And it can be really easy to change process instead of creating code. Humans are malleable. We can do a lot, and we can help organizations achieve their goals if we put the effort in the right place. So that's where identifying these different locations becomes really handy. And this example just kind of shows how people might move through buying tickets. And you can identify pain points in the process and areas where you can improve things. It's a very valuable exercise. Some of them are done with much, much more complexity than this. A brief word about content strategy, because we'll come back to it again later. It's very important. It's an area that we're getting increasingly engaged in, and it's a sometimes difficult process because it involves a lot of research. It involves a lot of inventory, complicated thinking, organizing, figuring out what kind of content is inside of this giant archive, to start imagining how it could be reorganized to present a simple plan is daunting. It can be painful internally to undertake, and too often, because we're in this CMS game, we think we can just give people a system, and they're going to put their content in it. Everything's going to be fine. It's going to be fine. You just put it in. You add a page. You add a link. You add a menu. It's great. No problem. You're in control. Well, it's very easy to take that control and have a difficult communication with your audience. And as an agency, we bring the technology and also the organizations of similar scope and scale to be able to provide some kind of strategy around how the audience engagement is going to transpire. One way that we do this is with IA diagrams. So we try and communicate some structures. This is not, if you guys are familiar with Drupal a little bit, you may have heard of taxonomy. This was a small diagram that explains to the client not taxonomy per se and the abstract and gnarly notion, but there's these kind of like larger chunks that they have internally. This organization is a media organization, and they had these content buckets called collections. And collections were like these things that had a lot of different topics in them. So you might have a collection that's like vehicles, and inside the collection you've got a bunch of topics, and those topics are cars, boats, and trains. And then the content all connects to it. But they had they wanted to do this kind of relational model. And this kind of thing, sometimes it seems really obvious, to us, but putting it down and putting it out there, making sure everyone's on the same page is super, super important. Because you can get into a situation like this where, okay, there's an organization, here's an organization, a bunch of examples that have come back from these guys. They're a really wonderful org, and they provide the largest repository of online accessible reading materials. So individuals who have print disabilities can go access books and read them on the screen, graduate high school, in normal class settings, and read novels, do all kinds of fabulous things with this large inventory of content. So we're migrating. We're not migrating. We're restructuring their site. We're building something up. They have an existing site. How does that play out? Well, we built this kind of like architecture model, and then we were like, hey, is this kind of like what we're talking about? This is not exhaustive. It's not a sitemap. It's an information architecture that emphasizes the importance of some of these buckets and how they're going to relate to one another. And they were like, well, not quite. So we did another version. We put these little stickies on them. You click on them. They have a little bit of detail. And then we did this thing. This is kind of cool. They had this retro projector, and we projected the thing on a screen. We took some sticky notes. We drew on the whiteboard, got some more information, and provided another version. So just having something that you can refer back to and say, hey, is this the site? Does this start to describe the story, the content strategy, or not? This is another kind of example, which is not so much about the structure of the site, but about process. So this other organization, they had events, and the events appear in different states on the site. And we're not building this exactly, like we're not creating events that are before, during, and after exactly. But conceptually, there's a big event going on, like a camp. Before it happens, we want people to sign up. We want them to do various things. Afterwards, the sessions are recorded. They go on the site. There's kind of a shifting nature to this content, and it was important to have conversations around it. And we can sit around and think we're in agreement, but unless there's something tangible we're looking at, how do we know we're really on the same page that we can point to, that we can workshop? So this is another kind of example. So user stories are a mechanism that we use to describe the functionality that we want to achieve on the site based on real needs. So it's like, how can I satisfy this need, right? And we test the user stories at the end of the game with the development to make sure that we're providing value to the user ultimately. That's super, super critical. The user stories that we write, they don't directly use the personae that we developed earlier on, but we use them to validate the personas. We use roles more in this situation. So, Joe, maybe in this case, he's an editor. Joe is, but we understand that Joe is like a high-performance individual. He's got an iPad. So when we write a user story for him, as a content editor, I want to be able to go and edit content on the site, and he's a major player. Like, we know we need to build the site that's editable on the iPad. It's probably not. You know, we would have questioned that persona as a core member probably of this strategy. But it just shows you how this kind of stuff can play out. Cool. Do you guys have any? I just talk. So if you have questions, please. Okay. So the user stories. All right. Content strategy. You probably know about continuous integration a little bit. Okay. So continuous integration is this notion that you can keep testing your code as it's delivered out to make sure you're not breaking anything. You write a line of code, there's some tests that run, and there's some obscure part of the website that you don't see right away. You want to make sure that it's not broken because you keep pushing the code out, and 4 iterations gone, it's like it's exploded and you don't know what happened, and then like the CEO's calling you and you're like, what did you do? It's like, I didn't do anything. I changed the color of the font on the homepage. So where did it happen? These are the kinds of things that these are important things for code. But content strategy is often seen as something that starts at the beginning. You figure out the strategy and then you enact it. In this case, what we did is, and this was it was just serendipity, but this information architecture I showed you earlier had a bunch of these large content buckets, and these are major new concepts around that articulated a strategy for organizing what previously was a much more disparate communication from the organization. So we called this thing Help Center, and then later on we use those particular that particular nomenclature, help strategy, in constructing and sorting our user stories. So we would say, hey, this user story is about the Help Center. And it's very useful for figuring out, where, if we have good enough coverage on all these major areas we're trying to do, and the content strategy is then feeding into the functionality that we're looking to build ultimately, the user stories we're trying to satisfy. So this is another part. This is new. This is a little bit of a revelation to me. I didn't anticipate it happening, but it seems to be working pretty well. Style tiles. Some of you may have heard of them. Some of you may have seen them. What are they? Interior design. I'm familiar with the interior design kind of world. You want to get your living room remodeled. You hire an interior designer. They don't just start doing things. They talk to you. They're like, hey, what if we put drapes up? What if we put green drapes up and a purple couch? It's going to look really awesome. And you're just like, well, I don't know. How do they communicate that effectively? They go and they get a little swatch of the purple leather. They get a piece of the green drape. They paint the board. They show you a board, and this is how it'll kind of combine. Well, we do this when we're putting together websites because nowadays everything is responsive. You don't know where it's going to go. It's going to go on a TV. It's going to go on a projector. It's going to go on a phone. Its resolution may change next week. The Nexus 17 is going to be here in like 6 months, right? This rate. And how do we know? How do we know how all this stuff's going to fit together? We have to make decisions. We have to build new things. We're like developing. What do we refer back to? We don't have a wireframe for it. Well, we have the style tile, which sets out some levels of like emphasis around typography, some treatments, and then when we're building the site, we put these things into play. We go a little bit more into detail. We start to build out some of these widgets and articulations and create design patterns around these things. I'll show you some sitemaps later. We still do them. They can be useful, but we much prefer to keep things fluid and do some prototyping and testing in the browser. Sitemaps. Sometimes it can be hard to create a sitemap for Drupal sites because they're often quite relational, and the data is not a series of static pages. So we try and describe how the content on these pages is being constructed. We talk about this being like a bunch of content that's tagged. This is a site of a different nature. To give you a taste. But this is important. It provides some broad strokes. We make sure we're on the same page. we're building out all the things that we need to build. It's a little bit more on the build side. Oh, wireframes. Okay, so like here's some wireframes. You know, these aren't mobile. You start to do this, then you have to make wireframes for mobile, and you have to do like it's so many wireframes. It's crazy. Like we don't have time for this. We just don't have time. We have to start making things. Occasionally, for really key sections, it is important to figure it out. You know, it takes longer to code things than to move some boxes around. So it's a useful exercise. Most of the time, the design patterns we've laid out, the style tiles, the objectives on the page, the mechanisms we use let us prototype things quickly and move stuff around, which is what we prefer. But you know, you never know. So we still do these. They don't have to be hi-fi. You can draw them. They're nice. They're friendly. I don't like balsamic. Just use a pencil and paper. Lazy. Just kidding. Balsamic's fine. It's a good tool. But you know, if you can draw a straight line, just draw a straight line. Balsamic's not like rocket science. It's just, you know, it creates these like hand-drawn looking boxes and everything. It's great for components when you got to put a bunch of text in this and that. But that's kind of like more of a lo-fi model. Anyways, so just a note about this. About expectations. Expectations are really important to set. We talk a lot about them internally in our organization because you know you got to make things work, right? You gotta deliver. And if people are not on the same page, and you're not doing what you said you were going to do, that's a problem. So you know we try to set expectations early, but sometimes expectations are already set. Client will come to us and they'll say we want something. We know what we want. We've figured it out. We have a budget. Well, that's great. But this is where discovery comes in. You know, I mean, budgets are important. Don't get me wrong. You know, no one wants to have like an unlimited spend on something that's very important to them when they don't have unlimited amounts of money. But it can sometimes be putting the cart before the horse. We like to engage in discovery outside of the scope of projects, in order to help those expectations be set. Because ultimately, you can't drive a project with business requirements. Businesses are changing all the time. We build based on the functionality that is going to benefit the user, and that's what we put at the core of our process. And the business requirements, there are clear ones that need to be satisfied. We always try and measure those against the value to the user. And that's kind of how we like to set the priorities. But you know, it's a negotiation, and sometimes there are things you just have to do, right? You can't. You got to move the project ahead. But you know, in the end, if we just walk into a project and we say, hey, what do you want? Yeah, we can do it, no problem. I mean, how is that going to help anyone? First of all, we kind of know what we're talking about. The client knows their business better than us. But that's what we're learning together as part of discovery. And by questioning some assumptions, we found that we always come to a new understanding, and a new understanding not only of what this project was about, but what the organization is about. An organization that's in the process of making a new website or revising their old website is in a process of transformation. It's an opportunity to re-envision how things are done. Earlier I showed you a customer journey. Sometimes it's not just a website, it's a lot of other things. A lot of other things that could be done better, differently. And it's an excellent opportunity, since everyone is motivated to make things better, to see how these things can improve. Ultimately, we want to see our clients, we love our clients, we want to see them succeed, we want the best for them, and we want their members and the people that they support and the whole purpose for being to be realized. And we make websites, but we have different backgrounds. We come into this world like caring about things, caring about outcomes, and that's what we're motivated by. You know, we don't just want to write some code, get paid. We want to change the world. So how do we do that? There's this new term. Trying it out today. It's called Apocalypse Website. This is my spin on things. It's not always possible, but here's the thing, right? Imagine your house is burning. You can only go back and get one thing. Like, what is it, right? You've heard the story. You've probably gone through this exercise before. Your website is gone. It is gone. You are never getting it back. You have to get something up. You have to get something up right now. What do you put up there? What's the bare minimum that you need to communicate what your organization is about and what needs to happen? It's the website apocalypse. And how do we realize? It's a different approach because, you know, everyone wants to put everything in. You don't want to leave anything behind. I was talking with a colleague of mine earlier today. I showed her this slide. She was like, ha ha ha, well, I don't know if that can work because, you know, I tried that with a client. And then what happened is, you know, we put together a site really quickly, and then they didn't want to do anything else. I was like, great. I mean, why would you spend like a whole year trying to put every single page from your old website when you just put together like a simple thing and it works and you're not, you know, you're satisfied with it? Okay, there's more that can be done, but it's just a different way of thinking about it. You know, start from the beginning, start from the ground up, and kind of rebuild it. We're not throwing everything away. Well, I mean, it's the apocalypse, but you know, it's a tool. These are all tools and techniques. It's something I'm kind of trying out, and it's useful when you have a very complicated site. How do we really realize that? We prototype. Drupal is a great tool. It's a content management system. Let's get in there and manage some content as soon as possible. Why? You can't just make a site and give it to a client and be like, here, and then give them some training and some manuals, and you're going to find all these things that don't work, and you'll be like, oh, we're out of budget. How do we fix these things? And then they're like, but this doesn't do what we thought it was going to do, and how do we use this? And it doesn't, I have this, like, I use this thing, and it doesn't work, and then you're, like, dealing with all these, you're pulling your hair out. Also, you're spending a lot of time, like, training, and really, if we start early, get people using their website. They're training themselves, and we're learning, and we're building things, and there's another sense of like appreciation for what's being put into it, other reflection that's being made. There's temperament also, which is very important. You know, in these situations, there's a lot of communication. There's like ego. There's all kinds of things. People want things right now. If they know things are moving, and you know, we have a space to talk about these things. Everyone will be heard. The sooner they're heard, the better. The better the project will be. The better the relationship will be. And so what we do is we use tools. We leverage a distribution called Panoply, which we have contributed extensively to, and continue to do so. We put other parts on top of that. And earlier that slice, we're trying to shrink that slice by providing these tools so people can drag and drop and put things on the page and we can try it out. It might not be the final form, the final data architecture that will be realized in the end product, but it gives us something to like understand immediately. It gives the client like tangibility, and it helps to inform things ultimately. In the end, we're enacting the content strategy. We're enacting it early, we're enacting it continuously, we're living the dream, and in the end, we're delivering code babies. You know, we drop these things in, and they provide this extra like bundle of joy that enhances the whole situation, starting from a decent state. Now, this works for a lot of like typical CMS type solutions. If you're building a more like application-y thing, it's maybe not a process that will work. But a lot of the sites that we end up working on, university departments, nonprofits, they fit this model. So, I don't know, this is my new philosophy. And that's what I got. Yes, that's true.
And that's what you've been working on now. And that's not a website.
No, it's not a website. It's an internal tool that we developed to help lower that barrier and minimize the amount of overhead that we have to develop websites. It is a standard platform upon which we can all work together to, developers can work on the site. We're sure that we're in the same environment. We minimize that kind of internal chaff. And it's grown. It's grown into something more. We have a couple thousand users now. We're still in private beta. And you guys used it to build the campsite here.
So Kalamuna is like one project.
Kalamuna has three distinct wings. Well, I don't know if they're wings per se. We have tracks, kind of. And one is a products track in which the Calabox and other types of improvements that lower that barrier to live. We have a support channel in which we continue to evolve or take on existing sites and help nurture them. And then we have an agency track, which is the part that I'm more engaged with and growing. And that's where the discovery process lives. It's working directly with clients and providing either a full service or part of a service. We have clients we just do discovery for as well, or site audits, these type of things, and they kind of live in that space.
I got a bunch of questions. They're sort of related. So all the things that you're saying sound pretty awesome, but I'm wondering how you get clients on board so much. Particularly if we're going to show you something at a certain stage, and that's how we can get you back. How do you avoid seeing this thing in a lot of security there? They just suitably impressed by the thing that they don't notice the other clients.
Time is the most important factor. So, the longer we can get that feedback cycle, the more we can extend that kind of discovery engagement and the interaction, close that feedback cycle, the better. But it's some politics, it's some working with people, it's using some of these tools so that we're not just talking abstractly, but we're talking about something specific. When we are putting the technology in front of them, the website in front of them to use. So, that just happened this week for one org. I was like, here. I gave them a quick demo, and I was like, break it, do whatever, just start to get familiar with it. I'm gonna see how that goes. Typically, it's okay. This is a large organization, so there's going to be all kinds of thoughts and feedback, and it'll be interesting to see. It's like some extensive user testing, and it's not easy, but building websites nowadays it's not like it used to be. So we gotta really put get our game up and put the effort in and make sure the communications are clear and that there are people dedicated to these tasks and making sure that things are followed up. Things are clear, that the meetings happen, and that there's a process, and that's different in every situation because every organization. You might have a board, you might have one person you're dealing with, you might have one person you think you're dealing with, but really, it's their cousin that's going to make the final call because they're VP of marketing and they hold the purse strings. And it's someone else's pet project to see the website done, and you've got to figure all that out and try and orchestrate that early on, find a process with consensus. Work.
Yeah, in the initial discovery phase, it seemed like that was what's up the side of the hack. Sounds like that's what fixed budget, fixed ideas about that. So is that something that a lot of frustration for clients? I have to buy.
Well, number zero, client qualification. Are they we have limited amount of time. Yeah.
I asked them, what's your budget? What happens is that you start working with them, give them all this, you answer and tell you all the time like this.
Yeah.
So you can ask them what your expectation. So you can try to think what their needs are based on that.
Money is often a constraining factor. Sometimes it's not. People will give you a number, and really they have more, less. They don't really care. They're just trying to pull something, and you're trying to shove it in. But the value, as it's demonstrated, and especially if you're providing real value to the organization, it's translating to dollars or sign-ups or memberships. That's where it is. That's the value proposition, right? It's not like how much is this website going to cost us. It's is the work that we're putting in helping improve what we do as an organization. application. That's the real measure. But we can't measure that, without some terminology, without going through discovery. Because otherwise, it's just like, does this website work? Could it work better? Could we make the Ajax faster? Like, maybe we should do a Meteor application or whatever. Then you get into these spaces and we start to talk internally in the teams. And we make something cool. And we've done the project, and the client's like, thanks. But no.
Yes. I think I've helped. I have just doing the examples of different kinds of websites. I don't just tell them. Doing something like that, plus something like that, something like this. So they kind of get aware of how much it's like. So that's why they see functionalities that we try to try. So it's kind of getting more excited, and then sort of like, then they can find like another website.
That's a good technique. What do you like? What don't you like? And that we try to funnel that back to the user stories in the end, where it's like the user wants this cool. No, you want this cool thing because you saw it, and it's useful to know what the client wants. But it's ultimately, what does the user need to achieve, and what is the best route for them to achieve that? And then our response is, how do we satisfy that story? How important, firstly, is that to you? If it's very, very important, we organize all this stuff and we say, like, these are the top things we need to take care of. We look at that and we say, how can we realize this? Okay, here's some options. We can do A, we can do B, we can do C, or we have no idea. That's never the case. But if we have no idea, then like we need to bring some other people on potentially. So we say option A is going to be like this much time or this much effort. In story points. This much effort, that much effort for this, and this much effort for that. And they're like, well, we always want the best, right? But they have a budget. So then there's a certain amount of control where you're like, hey, here's the project, here's all the stuff we need for the users. And if we go for like the hardest thing that may be the best thing everywhere, like we're gonna blow this budget. But then the control is more than within the client space, where they can decide to spend on where the value is, and that's reasonable. I mean, that's empowering versus like, how long is this going to take? How much is it going to cost? When is it going to be done? It's like, these are the things that we want. We want to have. We want to put more into this. We're willing to put a little bit more or a little bit less. That's not so important. Let's just put that. Let's have that fall off.
We used to make these graphs. I actually don't know. I'm sure there's an industry name for them. It's a graph of features or things people have heard of plotted impact and effort. So something, this is going to take an immense amount of effort, and it's actually not very impactful in terms of priorities. And if you graph it like that, things just fall off. People stop talking about them because you can just see on the graph that it's near the bottom and it's not helpful.
So we use Jira for a number of projects, and you can put these values in, and then you can sort. You can create some filters, and it'll just like filter the things in different views on stuff. It's like, hey, what's really important? What's not so important? You can kind of like look at it in different ways. Yeah.
We need to help them prioritize and say, is this important more than the 3 or 4 things that you first mentioned? And that's all the right things.
You actually work with them say let them break that just
Well, we have different environments. I don't throw them into the live environment and be like, yeah. So we put them in. I put them in the test environment, and then it's a volatile space. Just pull live back down. And that's the thinking. See how that plays out. Typically, I've been a little bit more hands-on with things. But there's just like so many people. Like I can't be can't be there all the time. They're going to have this thing later. Might as well break it now. So we can remove the things that they tend to click, they shouldn't click. We can change permissions, figure out how tech-savvy their editors are. Administrators, like maybe we need to revise the roles, maybe we need some better workflows. So, within this organization I'm talking about, it's a huge transformational shift for them. They not a screen reader, it's a web reader. So these the books that are formatted for accessibility often have these weird formats. To download them, put them somewhere. They have this thing, it's a Chrome extension, you can just play it right in the browser. You can read it, and it'll highlight and everything, and it's great. But their website was built on top of this application, which is a Java-based application. And they found another component, which was like a CMS add-on. And so in order to change any content on the site, the organization had to open up tickets with engineering to change content. And this is obviously they engaged with us because they wanted to be able to control their content. And I won't even get started on all the integration components of this project, but there's a transformational shift within the organization. They're going to have to figure out how to negotiate content creation process and the flows and what kind of authority and who's going to do what. And is marketing in charge? Or like I sense this coming, so that's why I threw them in there, is they're going to have to work this stuff out. And they didn't come to us originally in the budget and say, we need to figure out an editorial process and change our structures and reporting and organization. That's going to happen. So anticipating that, try and put the parts in place that will help them facilitate. Mm-hmm.
Do you not sweat the modules?
So
the editor or somebody else writes to them.
Yeah.
Sweat that?
Well, typically the way that in our kind of like start state, editors are not really able to do much that's affecting anything that's featureized. They're editing content mostly. Administrators have greater levels of access and they can go and change the configuration. But we try and capture everything in the features. We can see if they've changed something. We can understand their behavior a bit better on the site. So we can't record and watch what everyone's doing. But if we see they're overriding features, they're clicking on things, they're changing permissions or something, maybe we can pull that apart and figure out what's going on. Well, I mean, it's some information for us. Yeah, it's some information for us. But I mean, I never told them about how features works and this kind of stuff. We'll take a look and we'll give us a data point. Sure, but that happens. Layouts change, and then they don't override the feature. You can change the layout on it. And we're initially when we put things out, we don't provide panelized pages with hard layouts necessarily. So this is just a basic content model. There's some pages. You can move the layouts around. You can put some maps and widgets and things on there, and you can build them up. And the features don't get overridden because it's they're doing content. It shouldn't override the features. The features are code. Satisfy that user story, powerful thirst, perhaps. Thanks.